Welcome, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Motivate, Grind, Succeed podcast. The podcast which has the goal of improving your life in the four foundational cornerstones of faith, fellowship, finances, and fitness through practical tips and takeaways with every single episode. Every single episode. If you're new to the show, guys, welcome. And I know you're going to get a ton of value from this week's episode. And if you're returning, welcome back. I miss all of you guys. How y'all doing? Quick favor, though, to everyone who is listening, new or returning. If at any point in this episode you get some value, I would like you to just share this episode with just one person. Just one person. That's all I ask, so we can get this information flowing to as many people as we possibly can. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, we're going to get into this week's episode. And this week, guys, as you see, we have a fantastic guest on the show, guys. Branch Isole. But before we let him deliver on the wonderful wealth of knowledge he has to give today, let me give you all an introduction to him, just a brief introduction, and he can go into the rest of it. So, Branch Isole, author, poet, and storyteller, and he talks about the power of choice and consequence. He's known worldwide by his contemporary short stories that reveal issues and emotions often experienced but not always voiced. He graduated from Texas State and did graduate work at University of Houston, and he holds a theology degree from the Trinity Bible College and Seminary. And he's here today to discuss with us about his faith and how that can correlate to helping us to be successful in our daily lives. Branch, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, sir?
Good afternoon, Rashawn. Man, I've been waiting to talk with you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're able to make some time to come on the show, and I'm so glad to be able to talk to you. And I think you're going to be the first person that we're going to be talking to on the show that really brings home the faith portion of this show, right? 'Cause I talk a lot about the four foundational cornerstones, and I feel like there hasn't been enough push in that first cornerstone, unfortunately. So I feel, as an obligation to what the show stands for, I have to bring some more of that. So thank you so much for coming onto the show to be able to help start off the snowball that is this faith cornerstone. So I appreciate it very, very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and get started with how we usually do with most of the guests here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And like I said, I've already given a introduction to you, a very short introduction as to who you are and what it is that you do. But of course, only you can tell your story the best. So go ahead and give us, a look into Branch's life. Wherever you want to start is okay. If you want to start from Little Branch up until where you are now, or just give us just the general story of how you got from wherever you want to start to whatever you're doing now.
All right, great. Well, I was a military child. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. So we traveled quite a bit. Lived in a lot of different countries and a lot of different places. One of the blessings and curse of being in the military is every 3 or 4 years you move, but you get to meet a lot of different people. And so I had an interesting upbringing, living out of the country and then living in different states. After college, I went into corporate sales and marketing. I did that for about 15 years. After corporate experience, I'm kind of a rebel, so that didn't work real well for me, although I was very successful. I've always had sort of a thing with authority. But after that, I became an entrepreneur, and I was partner or founder of 5 different small business startup entrepreneurial companies. And at midlife, I decided I wanted to go back to school. I had this urge to learn more about myself and my walk from the world's perspective and from a spiritual perspective. So at 52, I went back to college, got a degree in theology, and started writing my first book. And so 25 years later and 22 books later, here we are.
Wow, 22 books, man. That is very impressive. And I love the history too, being able to go from, like you said, from that military background and everything growing up, and then going into corporate, and then being able to step out of the corporate world and then being able to follow what it is that you truly feel is like what you're being called to do. I absolutely love it. That's a great background story. Thank you for that. I appreciate the little bit of the history lesson here, and into a little glimpse into the life of Branch here. I appreciate it. Thank you. So,
Yes, sir.
all righty. So moving on then to some of the questions that I have for you that are going to be kind of our guiding topics of discussion for today. Right. We're gonna first talk about the what you believe to be the elements of success, right? And so a lot of times on the show, I talk about what is success, right? And I talk about what does it mean, right? We all have different definitions of what success means. And what we have come to the conclusion of is that success is pretty much what it means to you, right? Because my definition of success might not be your definition of success, which might not be your brother or sisters or your family members or your coworkers or whoever's definition of success, right? So, whatever success means to you, right? That's what it means to you. But disregarding whatever success means to each individual person in general, in order for us to achieve whatever goal it is that we deem to be successful, my question for you then, Branch, is what do you believe are some of the most important elements that we need to possess in order to achieve that success that we want?
Yeah, those are great questions, Rashawn. Like you say, everybody has their own goals and their own ambitions that sort of form that foundation of what they believe success will be for them in their lives. I talk to people, about four different kinds of fundamentals that build success, whether it's with our families and relationships or whether it's at work. The same fundamentals are there in all of our efforts. So the first one is about relationships. Life is about relationships. And as we grow, our relationships change. But there's four things that form the cornerstones of every successful relationship. And those are love, approval, agenda, and spiritual grounding.
Mm.
And real quickly, everyone is capable of giving and receiving love. And that in our essence, especially our spiritual essence, is the cornerstone of who we are. That's what relationships is all about, right? Getting along, having those friendships, having those intimacies, and having that feeling of companionship and love. So love is the essential one. The second one is approval. We all grow up as children craving approval first from our parents and then from our peers. And then as adults, finally from the world at large. And we're always seeking that approval by the things that we do and the things that we say. The third one that a lot of people don't think about is agenda. Not only do we have an agenda, moving us forward, but at some point, hopefully we come to the realization that everyone who comes into our lives also has an agenda. And once we realize that, we start to see the way that people behave around us a little bit different. There's always that perception of, well, I want to put my best foot forward until somebody takes advantage of me and steps on that foot. But so once we realize everybody's got an agenda, they're trying to get us to respond somehow that benefits them. And the fourth one, and I'm glad you said this early on in the introduction, is spiritual grounding, because that's the one that's usually missing or on the back burner for a lot of people. As humans, and especially in this day and age, we get caught up in our world and our things and our goals. And a lot of times we don't realize that not only are we human, but there's also a spiritual side to us. There's a spiritual access to us that we don't often take advantage of. And as long as we are missing that, our life can be out of balance. It can be skewed because, we're focusing exclusively on how am I getting ahead in the world? What am I doing? What's working for me? And when that spiritual part is missing, when that faith part is not active, then we can be out of balance. And once we're out of balance, we start to see only the things of the world. And that's where the stress and the struggle and the pressures all come from. So that's the first thing is those four cornerstones of relationships themselves. And then real quickly, in addition to that, there's four blockchain elements to success. And again, whether it's success at home or success at work. And those four are real simple. There's stability, motion, direction, and applied power. And I always like to give an example. Think of you're going down to the marina and you're looking at four identical sailboats and you're thinking about buying one of those. And the first one you get in and it doesn't have a keel, right? It's a flat bottom. So it has very little stability. You've seen people get into canoes or small boats that don't have a keel, design keel in them, and they wobble back and forth. So you've got to have stability. The second one is motion. So the second sailboat has the keel and it's got the stability, but it only has sails, right? So as long as the wind is blowing, you have that motion and you can move forward. The third one is direction. So our third sailboat has not only the keel we need for stability, it also has our sails for motion. And this one has a rudder or a steering assembly so that we can actually guide our direction. And the fourth one has an outboard or an inboard motor. So it's completely equipped. And no matter what happens with the wind, we've still got that applied power. So if you keep these four in mind, again, in relationships at home or relationships at work, if you keep these four in mind, then you always know where you're at, you always know where you're going, and you always see the tricks and the turns and what it takes to get there. So I always like to, help people realize you've got these four that apply to you personally, and then you've got these four that apply to you in your interaction with the world, especially in a career situation.
That was a lot of good information right there, Branch. Thank you very much for all of that. I was definitely taking a couple notes here while you were talking, so I have a couple things written down here. And so just kind of piggybacking off what you said a little bit, when you were mentioning like with the first four that you were talking about, right? The two that really stuck out to me were the spiritual grounding and the agenda, right? So the spiritual grounding one is definitely very important, right? Because as a Christian man myself, I believe that if you don't have faith, I mean, it's part of the one of the four foundational cornerstones that we have in the podcast here. But if you don't have that spiritual grounding, like you really don't have much really going for you in general. And what I mean by that is that we all understand that at the end of this life, we're all going to pass away. So if you have no type of foresight of saying, okay, there's stuff to come after this life, it almost begs the question of like, what are we doing all these things for? Right. So if you don't have some sort of grounding now saying, hey, I'm doing this not for me right now and not for me in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I'm doing this so that way I can help multitudes of people. And so in the case of spiritual grounding and being able to be stable in that, whatever you're doing, it is to say, I am doing this so that way I can be like Christ, essentially, or be at least in his image. So people who follow me will be able to see what it is that I'm doing and be able to say, that is a person who follows Christ. Maybe they might not say that per se, but they'll be able to say, there's something different about you. I'm not sure quite what it is, but there's something different about you, but I like it. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll keep tabs on you about that. And then the only other thing that you brought up too, as well as with agenda, all you gotta do is just live long enough, and you'll eventually find out that a lot of people do have they have an agenda for your life, and it usually does not align with your own, right? A lot of people they want to get what they want to get, and then you want to get what you want to get, and the two just do not mesh together well at all, right? Because everyone's kind of out for themselves to do their thing, right? And so, you know, people having that kind of an agenda, it's not. Well, once you realize that's what it is, then you start to understand, like, hey, okay, I need to keep my trajectory, and like you said, those the cornerstones and the foundation that you talked about, we need to keep those like dead center, force blinders on, and only really focusing on those. So That was very good information. I really hope everybody was taking notes on that because I definitely sure did. So thank you very much for that, Branch. That was very, very informative.
Sure. It's interesting, Rashawn, that as believers in God, and it doesn't matter what religion you are, if you believe in a higher source, a higher power, a God in the universe, and you believe that He's the creator of all there is, then He is our creator as well, right? In our pure essence of existence, we are a little electrical unit that is embraces and is given a spirit by God. And when we are born, we're a combination of four essential things: mind, body, soul, and spirit. And our spirit comes from God as the creator, and it lives within our soul. Being humans, and the world that we grow up in, it's a physical world. So our first interactions, our first acknowledgments, our first modes of learning all pertain to our physical needs, right? We are birthed and immediately we need assistance. We're not like a lot of animals who are out of the nest and on their own. We need nurturing and care literally every day of our lives early on. About age 2, we come to learn the concept of no and the concept of right and wrong. And all of our legal systems are fundamentally focused on right and wrong, but it's applied as reward and punishment. So about age 2, we start to realize what reward and punishment mean in terms of our behavior. And as we grow, that's what our focus is: reward and punishment, because that's what's reinforced in our legal system. That's what we grow up and are comfortable with. What's missing is the moral and the ethic understanding. And that's what we get from God, from Christ. That spirit that lives within us innately knows right from wrong. And again, it's reinforced as we grow. And that's how we live our life. So if we go through life, like you mentioned before, only dealing with right and wrong, or what's in it for me, how do I make this situation work to my benefit, then my focus is always on me, right? And how do I get ahead? What does it cost me? And what's my gain? And is there a reward or a punishment for my response and my action? Well, if we go through life without that spiritual connection relit or fired again, then we're always struggling with the things of the world because, we're not always going to win. And a lot of times we get into situations where the choices we make and the consequences of those choices can really be harmful or dangerous or get us into situations that we wish we weren't in. So when we have our spirit within us solely focused on us, we're always in this battle with the world and of the world. And like you say, the people who come into our lives with these other agendas. Once we reconnect with the Lord, once we reconnect with God, especially for Christians through Jesus Christ, what happens is our spirit is reignited, it's rebirthed. And all of a sudden, when the spirit of truth, God's spirit, comes to live with our spirit, then we start to see truth in our world. And once we start to see truth, then the fallacies and the fabrications and the lies become self-evident, right? And seeing the truth now and seeing the lies next to them, I now have a choice. Am I going to live with that spirit activated in my life, or am I going to ignore it and continue down the world's path? And once our spirit is activated and we see the truth, we understand the moral and ethical implications of our choices. And what that does is it refocuses the consequence of our choice beyond myself, right? Once I know the moral and the ethical implications, now all of a sudden I see what those choices mean to my family, to my neighborhood, to my community, to my world. And basically, that's the difference between the person who is spiritually grounded and using that spirit actively and the person who's not spiritually grounded and they're just stumbling and fumbling and trying to get through the day with as little, you know, adversity as possible. And that's the difference between having an activated spirit and an unactivated or non-activated spirit. And like you said, you can tell the person who's got that spiritual grounding, right? They're more balanced, they're more accepting, they start to see the reality and the truth of the reality, and they make better choices in their life, which brings better consequences in their life.
Absolutely. Well said. I absolutely love that. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into that for a second, right? About spiritual grounding. I know we've been throwing that out there. We've been talking about it a little bit. Let's say somebody comes and says, "Okay, well, you've been talking about spiritual grounding all this time. It sounds really cool. How am I going to do that? Like how in the world could I even start getting on this journey of becoming grounded?" And then once we go through that, then I have another follow-up question after that. But let's start from the basics. Let's start from the ground up, literally, and figure out how we get spiritually grounded. So how we go about doing that?
Yeah, the love of God is so great that he makes it five simple steps for anyone who asks that question, how do I get spiritually grounded? How do I make that connection again? And this is great for new believers, seekers, searchers, or even fallen away Christians, because there's a lot of Christians out there who have experienced issues in their life that were related to the religion. And so there's five simple steps, and I'll go through them and I'll give you the scripture that tells us what they are. Number one, we invite Jesus into our lives. Like I say, God's love is so great, he demands nothing of us except before we die, we have to answer whether or not we believe he is who he is and what he wants from us. So we invite Jesus into our lives, and Jesus tells us in Matthew 7, ask and you'll find, seek and you'll discover, and knock and the door will be open, right? So once we invite him in, he sends his Holy Spirit, the same Holy Spirit of God, the Father, to be with us. And we embrace that Spirit. And as soon as we've invited him in, he sends the Spirit to us. And we're told that in John 16:13. Once we've got his Spirit, that anytime we want, anytime we've got a decision to make, a choice to make, something important to decide, we simply ask his Spirit to show us the way. And, there used to be this, what would Jesus do? The bead fad in the 90s. And it came from a book that was written by Charles Shelton in the 1800s. And what would Jesus do? God's Holy Spirit living in us shows us what Jesus would have done in that same situation. So the fourth step is emulating that. We're imitating or we're following his example of how he responded in that situation. And the fifth one is to finally believe, and this is in Romans 10, and it says, if I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that Jesus is the Son of God, then I'm guaranteed life ever after. And so God has made it real simple. He's given us five simple steps that we can reignite that spiritual connection with him. We can then use his Spirit as our strength in our daily life in every situation we might find ourselves in. We then know that we can emulate or copy or imitate what Jesus would have done in that same situation because his Spirit guides us. And then we confess with our mouth that we believe Jesus as who he is. And those five simple steps get us on that spiritual path and get God working in our lives.
Absolutely. I love the way that you phrase that, having those simple steps And then another key thing is to understand that not only are those steps simple, but they're really, really easy to follow. Like they're extremely easy. Like being able to accept the faith is not difficult whatsoever. And one point that I do want to also add to what you said as well is that the 5 steps that you gave are the 5 steps. What do I mean? That means that's it. There's nothing else to add. There's nothing else to subtract. That it is what it is. Because I know a lot of times people will say, well, that's it. There's got to be more to it. Like I have to offer up something. No, 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 no. Just simply 5 simple steps. Just like Branch said, just do those steps and you'll be good to go. So thank you for that. So anybody who is looking to get that spiritual grounding, anyone who want any more information on that, you now have your 5 simple steps. If you didn't get those, go ahead, rewind the episode a little bit, listen to those 5 simple steps again, write those down, and you'll begin to be on your way towards that. And so as I mentioned before, now that we have an understanding of the spiritual grounding and how to be able to go about doing that, now I get the follow-up question now is that after, let's say you after got the spiritual grounding already, and now you're being able to begin to grow in Christ or in faith of whatever it is that you're doing, what then we have to have some pillars, right? We have to have some foundations. We've been talking about with my show with the foundational cornerstones. You've been talking about the pillars of life and the pillars of being able to be grounded and the steps that you have. We're very framework oriented, right? I believe that's how we're able to do things very well. If we have a solid framework that's repeatable that we can consistently follow. So sticking with that framework, what are some pillars or some steps we can take to ensure that we have consistent spiritual growth, right? Because nothing we have, can grow or can become present or can really make an impact in our life if it's not done repeatedly, right? Like people who get good at their craft did not get good by doing it once and saying that they were done, right? So my question to you, Branch, then is what pillars do you say are the ones that we need to have to be able to ensure consistent spiritual growth?
Sure. Great question, Rashawn. And before I get into the 5, I want to build on something you just said. When people start this walk, and we're all doubtful, right? It's like learning to drive. You can drive great, but you don't know how to parallel park. So you practice and you practice and you practice the parallel parking. Well, walking with the Lord is the same thing. You take that first step and you say, okay, I'm ready. Now what? What do I do now? And what happens is the further down the path we go, the more we employ the Spirit within us, the more we see Him working in our lives. And it may be something very small and insignificant, but if it gets your attention, then it's the Lord working in your life. And as people who are on the spiritual path find out, the further down the path I go, the more I see His presence in my life and the more I see Him working in my life. So, when you start the path, don't be discouraged. It takes a little while. One of the things that the Bible notes is our time is not the same as God's time, and God works in our lives, in different ways. He doesn't bang us over the head with a great blessing just out of the gate. He lets us start slow and then gain our own momentum. So when you see the Lord working in your life and you recognize it, then okay, He's working with me. I'm moving forward. And the further down that path you go, the faster you go and the more you see Him operating. So that said, the 5 pillars of spiritual strength are truth, love, and spirit. And these all pertain to what the Bible tells us that God is. The Bible tells us in John 3 that God is truth. He tells us in 1 John 4 that God is love. And then in John 4 again, it tells us that God is spirit. So once we've got those 3 acknowledged that God is truth, love, and spirit, then we build on our faith, which we're told in Hebrews 11. And the 5th pillar is hope, and that comes from Romans 5. So we've got truth, love, spiritual strength, faith, and hope. And those 5 pillars give us everything we need. Again, it's real simple. Those are the 5 pillars of spiritual strength that once we have that relationship going, they are part of our daily life. And we see them, we see their strengths play out in our choices, in our consequences, in our everything that we do. Those start to show themselves. And that's what propels us down the path, down the spiritual path.
And absolutely love those. Yes. And you're sticking with the framework. I absolutely love it. Yes. And one thing I do want to just touch on a little bit with that, where you talked about the pillar of growth being faith, right? That is usually a really, really tough one for people to really grasp and really get a solid hold of. Like, we can understand the truth, right? Like, people can understand what is truth, right? People have a general knowledge of what truth is, right? We're not getting into the talk of your truth and my truth and what is true. It's not it's not the episode for you with that one. We can go on for years on that one. So, but generally we understand a topic and an understanding of what is true. Like, we understand what love is, what it means to be to have love. And if you're a little more versed in love, you understand about the different types of love that there are. Maybe you understand love languages, right? So we understand those. We understand the importance of spirit and God being there and being able for him to embed his spirit into us. We understand that. And even hope, being able to, as people say, be able to hope for a better tomorrow or things of that nature, right? But like I said, the one we usually tend to have the hardest problem with is the faith, because faith essentially just means trust me. That's the hard part right there, because what ends up happening is that we, a lot of times, and I myself included, always want to see, okay, because I'm a very big planning person, right? I want to be able to see we are here, we are going here. What are the steps we need to take in between? And I want to be able to have visibility of what's going on from point A to point B. But faith is saying, okay, you're at point A, you see point A, you want to get to point B, but in between is just a fog. It's a gray area. You don't know what's going to happen. You can't plan for it. You have no idea what can come of it. But faith says, trust me that I will bring you through. And unfortunately for the listeners, this is not something that you're going to learn overnight. This is something that takes many, many years, some people an entire lifetime, to actually be able to understand and to continue to build that trust, to be able to just say, okay, pretty much hands off, I give it to you, God, and let him take care of it. So just wanted to throw in those 2 cents for you there, Branch. So I do agree with with the pillars that you had there. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, Rashawn, faith is the one that's always under attack. Faith is that aspect of our life that's continually tested every day by the world and by the situations and the events that we have to respond to. Am I going to respond to this person or this situation the world's way or God's way? And so that's where the test of faith comes. And because that's, all on us, right? I can understand truth and love and spirit, and I can have hope, but the one that's always under attack in my daily life is my faith. Is it going to knock me off the path? It's going to try. And that's the one that we struggle with and that's where all of the guilt and the shame and the doubt comes from, right? When we're on the path and we're relying on that spiritual grounding and we come under attack by the world and it knocks us off, what do we do? Do we get back up? Do we fight? Do I retreat? And so the faith part is the one that is always being tested. And it's the one where we have the greatest doubts and fears. And, there's a lot of recrimination, especially that we give to ourselves a lot of times. If I make a decision and it turns out to be a crummy consequence, and then I blame myself for, not making better decision. And then I start to go into that mode of beating myself up. Then I get into this cycle, and it's that cycle that eats away and gnaws at our faith. And that's what, that's what the devil uses. That's evil and corruption in order to wear us down. If he can destroy our faith, then he can start to remanipulate us to believing the lie again. So faith is the one that's tested every day, and it's the one that's under attack. And that's why it's so important, because there's the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder having that conversation. And the point of that whole conversation is always, am I going to be faithful? Am I going to be faithful to myself and what I now believe to be true? Am I going to be faithful to the Lord and his direction? Or am I going to turn my back like the Israelites did in much of the Old Testament? When they turned their back on God, God said, okay, you're on your own right now. It may be good, it may be bad, and it may be ugly, but whatever your choice is, that's going to be your consequence. When they had faith and stuck by him and things were tough, he always protected them. He always brought them to the other side successfully or victoriously. And he does the exact same thing with us. So faith is the one that's always under attack. It's the one that's always being tested. So that's why it's so important to not only keep the faith, but when we get knocked off the path, to regain and recommit to our faith. Our faith will give us that renewed strength to go forward and keep going on.
Absolutely. And it's just like the verse says, right? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. And so if we do not have that faith, just like you said, and we get knocked off our feet, and then we're unable to be able to just really come back from whatever that it was that knocked us off of our feet and knocked us off the track that we were on, we're not going to be able to, as the verse says, be able to bring the utmost pleasure to the Lord. And since that should be the goal of us as Christians here, for all the fellow Christians who are listening to this episode, since that is the goal, that is why Branch was able to put faith as one of the pillars. That's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit, right? Just to kind of get a firmer understanding, just to kind of really get that point out there. And so since we're on it, it pretty much segues me very well into the last question that I had for you. And that with the faith that we have, right? And you were talking about the decisions and the choices that we make on our day-to-day basis. And faith is definitely one of the factors. And actually the word that I have written is motivators. It's one of the motivators that we have behind our day-to-day decisions. What other motivators are there that really guide our day-to-day decisions that we have to make? And, if you have a framework for that one too, that'll be great. But if not, that's quite all right. But the question is just what motivators do we have that you use as well to be able to guide our day-to-day decisions?
Yeah, I've got a framework for you, President. Yeah. This is, when I was in sales and marketing, you always have that outline, right? You always have those salient points that you're going to try to make to get your customer or your client from where they're at to where you want them to be. So those lists become important. Those outlines become important. It helps us to remember very easily and gives us a track to run on. So yes, we have a framework. And it's interesting that, you asked about motivators. There are five motivators behind every decision that we make. The first one is need. Do I need it? The second one is want. Do I want it? The third one, which is especially salient today in our day and age, is status. What will it do for me? What will it make me appear to be in the eyes of others? The fourth one is love, because love is always the essential grounding point of who we are, why we're here. And the fifth, which is the strongest of all, is fear of loss. And the greatest fear is death, obviously. But if you are ever watch commercials, particularly in the evening, the fundamental aspect of whatever the company is trying to sell you is based on fear of loss. If you don't do it by tonight or you don't do it by tomorrow morning, you're going to lose that discount. So fear of loss is the greatest motivator of all. Now, These five are always in operation, either one or more at any given time. So any decision, any situation, any choice that you have to make, there's going to be at least one of these in the back of your mind that's going to be the real trigger to you go putting that into action. So if you know what those motivators are, then you can see which one, triggers that. Oh, I'm going to do this, or I want to do this, or I need to do this. And if you know what the motivation is that's triggering you, then you can sit back and actually analyze, I want this new Mercedes, but when I look at all of the things involved in that decision, maybe it's not the best car for me to be spending my money on. So if you know what the five motivations are, then you know which one in the back of your mind is actually being triggered when you're trying to decide how to put that desire or that thought into action.
Mm, love it. Absolutely love it. Great, great framework. Absolutely appreciate that. And I want to go and again, like I can't help but piggyback a little bit off what you were saying with this. I actually almost want to combine two of them, right? I think the big two that you mentioned, which was status and then the fear of loss. I think just having a fear of losing status is probably one of the biggest motivators itself that kind of pretty much make people kind of do whatever it is that they do in their life, right? Because when a person fears losing their status, it doesn't matter how long it took them to build. Sometimes they might have taken them years and years and years to build up this status to whatever it is. They might be the best in their field, the best at their job, an influencer with, I don't know, 500,000 followers or something on Instagram and a million followers on TikTok or whatever it might be. The fear of losing that a lot of times makes people do some of the weirdest things or some things that you'll scratch your head and wonder, well, why are they doing that? Why would they accept that brand deal? Why are they promoting this? Why are they all of a sudden saying this now? Because they want to keep that status. But here's the big kicker, right? The status, the funny thing is, right, this all comes back to faith. This is why I love this so much, right? The big kicker here is that the status was already given to you by God. That's the thing. So if God was able to give you the status, as long as you have faith, see how all this is tied together, guys? As long as you have faith that God will help you to keep that status and he has purpose of you to be in your position, as long as you're following what he says to do, in theory, you should not have to worry about the status that it is that you have because he gave it to you, meaning that at any moment, yes, he can take it away. But if he wants you to stay in that position of status or stay in that position of power, have that much influence of wherever it is that you are in your life, you're going to keep it as long as you follow what God says to do. And as long as you keep your head on straight and make sure you have faith that what it is that you're trying to do is what God is actually telling you to do. So I just wanted to add that little bit in there. What are your thoughts on that?
The book of Job describes just what it's an Old Testament book. And, Job had all the status and all the wealth and was well known in his community. And the devil went to God and said, Job has only got what he's got because of you. And if you took it all away, he would turn his back on you in a moment. And so God accepted Satan's challenge and he took everything from Job and left him literally in the dirt. And Job had three friends who came by and tried to convince him that he should denounce God because God had taken everything from him. And Job stood firm and he said, you know, the, God, it got so bad for Job that he said it would have been better had he never been born than the situation he was in. And because he didn't turn from God, God gave him back everything he had and more because he kept the faith. And so, we get into these situations in our lives where, even for Christians, why is God not helping me at this moment? I'm in a really bad situation and he's not there. Well, we have to remember that God allows us free will. And if we choose to do things, you know, based on what we want, if we're trying to keep that status with all of those followers and all of that celebrity, and that's where our focus is, then if we lose that, where are we? And so it's a test of faith. You hit it on the head, because we live in the most celebrity prone age of all of mankind. Um, it's unbelievable what people will do for status. And yet, if you look deep, there's not a person on this planet that doesn't have problems or issues. And some of the wealthiest, some of the most well-known, some of the really big names in every industry or every endeavor, we don't see behind those closed doors, and we don't see that the issues and the problems that they deal with. Just because they have status or money doesn't mean that their life is easy. And so status can be a real strange mistress, but the book of Job describes it and explains it really well. So if anybody's interested, that's the book to read when you want to read about what life can be like at that wealth and power level, and what it can be like when it's taken away.
Absolutely. All that glitters is not gold, guys. All that glitters is not gold. Remember, guys, the lawn might be greener on the other side, but you have no idea how they got it to be that green. So focus on your own lane. Have faith in what you need to do and on your mission, because God gave you that mission specifically, and keep your head on straight and keep focusing on that. So, Branch, thank you so much for the fantastic information. But I do have a couple more questions that I have to ask all the guests before we end off our time together here. So the first question I have for you is the classic. Let's just say somebody has been with us now these past 48 minutes and 3 seconds, right? And they just woke up. I'm talking like saliva on the side of their face, dried out. They just woke up. For some reason, they fell asleep during this entire episode, and they just woke up. Now they're just like, man, I don't want to go back and rewind and listen to it, which you guys honestly should, but they don't want to go back and rewind and listen to the entire episode. What is one parting piece of advice or wisdom that you can give to the listeners about anything that was discussed today?
Be honest with yourself.
Love it. Beautiful, simple, to the point. I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you very much for that. Be honest with yourself, guys, because I mean, if I could throw in just one sentence on top of that too, that it's better to be a genuine version of yourself than to be a carbon copy of somebody else. Because God made you for a reason. He gave you your strengths for a specific reason. He didn't give it to anybody else because he knew that you had the ability to take those strengths and turn them into something great. Thank you so much for that, Branch. And the last question that I have for you is that, let's say people are just very interested in your work. I said in the beginning, you were an author, you're a poet, and all these fantastic things. Where can people find more about you, find out about you on the worldwide internet, or find some of the work? Where would you like people to go to find out?
Sure. Thanks, Rashawn, for asking. Real simple. It's just my name, Branch, like a tree, I-S, like Sam, O-L-E. You can Google that. Everything I have is just under my name, my website, my YouTube channel, my podcast. I just Google Branch Isole, and that will give you all the links.
Fantastic. I will leave all those as per usual in the description. So if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the description. If you're listening to this on whatever platform you're listening on, Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, wherever you're listening, those will also be in the episode's description. So check out those links. Guys, that is all that we have time for today, guys. So we're going to have to bring this week's episode to a close. Thank you so much for tuning in today. But before you guys go, two things that I want you to do, and I promise you it's going to take you less than 2 minutes to do so. Number one, guys, I want you to subscribe or follow the show, whatever your platform allows you to do, so that way you can be on the lookout for new episodes as we post every single week, guys. And number two, go ahead and also follow me on social media as well. The links for that will also be in this episode's description. And yes, it is me behind the social media. So if you want to wave hi to me, that's great and awesome. So take care of yourselves, guys, and I will see you all in the next episode. Take care.